All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is daily vlog number 143. And I want to tell you, you have been lied to. Also, that sentence ended with a prepositions. This is so, it's also grammatically bad. Though, to be perfectly honest, with how much the English language has changed since I was in high school, I'm not sure if ending a sentence with a preposition is still considered a faux pas. Anyway, so saw an interesting video. I actually saw a couple interesting videos today. Bob Worldbuilder made a video to talking about. Oh, and this is D&D related for anyone that cares. Bob the Worldbuilder made a video talking about the fact that Wizards of the Coast has announced that the updated 5th edition rule set that's coming out end of August, early September, will be put into the public domain. It won't, or not public domain, I'm sorry. It'll be put into Creative Commons, which is just shy of public domain. But the caveat to that is it won't get put into the Creative Commons until after the Monster Manual is released in early 2025. And he mentions about the fact that this is a really, really good thing. And a lot of people have been kind of upset about, it's like, why is it taking so long to do it? It's because they want to put the entirety of the new rule set, including the new monsters, into Creative Commons. And basically having to release 3 different versions of the same document over a few months just isn't cost effective and isn't a good idea. So they're just waiting until everything's done to release it in Creative Commons. Later on in the video, he starts talking about how a lot of D&D news is either outright completely false or highly misleading. And if you're getting most of your D&D news from D&D YouTube, you might be thinking that D&D in and of itself is doing really poorly, that sales are down, that, you know, customer satisfaction's at an all-time low, that, you know, they're in danger of just not existing anymore. None of that is true. None of that has any basis in fact whatsoever. It's all either lies or misinformation intentionally meant, or statistics that are intentionally stated in a way to imply bad things when they say anything but. And he points to a video that Treant Monk did a couple weeks ago. I am not a huge fan of Treant Monk, not because I don't like what they do or anything like that. I quite literally don't really know them. But after seeing this video, I'm actually kind of interested in checking out a little bit more of their content. They are part of the kind of D&D YouTuber circles, which again, I have a pretty strong distaste for because of the aforementioned lies and misinformation. But based on this one video, it seems like he's not quite drinking the Kool-Aid, or they're not quite to drink the Kool-Aid. I actually have no idea what their preferred pronouns are, but so anyway, he made this video. It's called "The End of D&D Fact Check," or "The End of D&D?" Fact checking video. I'll have a link to the video itself in the description. Watch it in its entirety. A lot of these D&D content videos I tend to skip around in because, again, the spin is so strong that it leaves a bad taste in my mouth, and I have to skip it. This one really doesn't have a ton of spin. However, they do make some assumptions in there that, to be frank, are just not grounded in reality in any way, shape, or form. And I think most of it is just to do with a lack of understanding of uh, how a business is run and costs associated with it. Now, Tramp Monk does specifically say that they do have some experience reading uh, revenue reports and other things like that. So obviously they have some business experience, but some of the assumptions that they make are just outright not possible. So I would assume that they might have maybe some higher managerial experience, but don't actually have the experience of actually running a business. They've managed certain parts of a business, but they never run a full business. This is why they didn't think about quite a few different things. But the video itself touches on quite a few different topics, talking about the fact that quite a few different outlets have been saying things that are just blatantly false. Things like Hasbro's doing really poorly right now. They're not. On the other hand, and Tramp Monk actually goes into pretty good detail about this. It's the exact opposite. Their overall revenue stream is down. I think the number that's said in there, and it's said in a bunch of articles, somewhere in the neighborhood of 30%. Their overall revenue. And this is where the issue comes in with people that just don't understand business in general. Revenue doesn't really mean anything. It is useful in certain things because revenue is one of the things that is used to determine how much of a market share a particular company has. They'll look at the total revenue of different companies and basically just compare them, almost apples to apples kind of thing. It's like, well, if we're looking at like, I don't know, car manufacturers, we look at BMW's does like $30,000 or $30 million. All of these numbers are made up, by the way. They have no basis in reality. They're just easy to use number. So BMW has $30 million, and then Toyota has $30 million that they spent, and Dodge has $20 million that they spent, and Ford has $20 million that they are not spent, that they sold. Well, that means that the entire market is $100 million, and that means that BMW has 30% of the market share. So the reason that that's important is it does show who has the control over the market. And it is used in things like antitrust lawsuits and stuff like that. They will look at the amount of market share that you have. Other than that, it's a completely nonsense number. It doesn't really mean anything because you can have super high revenue and still be in the red. And for anyone that doesn't know, in the red means that you're operating at a loss. The reason it's called in the red is most accounting programs, when you show a profit, when you show positive money going into your accounts, it shows up as black. And when you see negative money, whether it means that you're losing money or just that you're taking money out because you spent it, it shows up as red. So when anyone says, a company is in the red, that means that they are operating at a loss. So revenue, again, is it just a complete, it's not technically a fictitious number, but it's a complete nonsense number. It means absolutely nothing in measuring how healthy a business is other than looking at things like market share. Hasbro in and of itself, the number that you do want to look at is profit, because profit is basically after all expenses are paid for, that's how much money they have left. That's the actual money that they made. And if you are in the black as far as your profit is concerned, that means that your business is covering all of its expenses and is making extra money that you can use for everything from reinvesting into the business, giving out bonuses, finding ways to reduce your tax burden. Like, there's tons of different things that you can do with profit. Profit is what is the actual important number. And Hasbro's profit has increased by a pretty significant amount. I don't remember the exact number, but Triant Monk actually talks about it in his video. Hasbro's profit is going really, really well. So how can they be 30% down in revenue? And that's total sales. Every time somebody buys something that Hasbro owns, that's part of their revenue. Whether it's something that Hasbro is selling themselves, whether it's something that they've licensed, anything that makes Hasbro money as a company, that's revenue. Revenue doesn't take out operating costs. It's just total money that exists that is somehow gone into a bank account, somehow associated with Hasbro. So how do they lose 30%, which is a massive amount of money, 30% of their revenue, and yet their profits are doing super, super well? Well, it's because they cut massive amounts of cost. Part of that was due to layoffs. Part of that was due to just reorganizing the company, making smarter business decisions. Like, there are so many ways and there are so many controllable costs that you have. And something that you learn in business school, your most controllable cost in any business anywhere is your payroll. Managing your teams effectively is the number one way to cut costs, because laying off people costs money. The average cost to lay someone off, and this is back in like 2012, 2014, so the number's gone off. If I remember correctly, the average cost to lay someone off is about $30,000. So to do some quick math, I'm going to get a calculator out for this because I can't do quick math anymore. They did what, 1,900? They got rid of 1,900 jobs times 30,000. That cost them $57 million. Now, due to overlap and stuff like that, probably wasn't anywhere near $57 million to fire that many people. But it probably cost them a minimum of $10-15 million to lay off all those people. Laying off people is expensive. Firing people is expensive for a number of different reasons. One of them, another thing a lot of people are not aware of, unemployment. When you collect unemployment, your company doesn't pay your unemployment benefits. That's actually done through the government. However, what the company does pay is they pay for a service called unemployment insurance. It is a regulated thing. Like, every business that exists, you're required by law to pay into unemployment insurance. And the amount that you pay is really complicated, but it's based on a number of different factors. One of the factors is just how many employees that you have, because the more employees that you have, the more employees that you can fire who might collect unemployment. Another thing that factors into that is how many employees in the past year, 3 years, I can't remember what the time frame is, how many employees have left your company and been able to qualify for unemployment. The more employees that leave the company that qualify for unemployment, the higher your unemployment insurance is. And it's not just like, oh, we're going to ding you an extra thing. No, your unemployment insurance rate increases for years. So something like a mass layoff like this, where all of them are going to be able to collect unemployment, because layoffs are a covered thing for unemployment. Generally, the reasons you can't collect unemployment, if you were fired for cause, you generally won't be able to collect unemployment. If you quit without cause, you generally won't be able to collect unemployment. And then there's a few other ones that get a little bit murky, but those are the two big ones. Is if you quit without cause, or the reason that you quit is not a protected cause. Like if the reason that you could quit was because you think that the cologne that your manager wears stinks, well, that's technically that is a cause. It's not considered cause for quitting. If the reason that you quit was a hostile work environment, which is one of the reasons I quit one of my jobs, and I collected unemployment because of it. because they had created a very toxic, hostile work environment by legal definition. I was able to prove that. So, laying off 1,900 people, probably, especially since their total workforce before that happened were somewhere in the neighborhood of like 6,500. So we're talking about a massive portion of their workforce that just disappeared. It cost them shit tons of money. So this idea is like, oh, you're just they're corporate greed and everything. No, it cost them a shit ton of money. They didn't want to do it. It was something that they just had to do. And it will continue to cost them shit tons of money for probably a decade. So that's one thing that they did. There's also a bunch of other ways that you can do that. You can effectively manage people better so that you're not paying as much overtime. For anyone that's not aware, at least in the U.S., overtime is paid at time and a half. So anytime, and depending on the state that you live in, overtime is measured a few different ways. The most common way is every hour after 40 hours in a work week, you get paid overtime. And that's federal law, that's state law in most states. I believe there is a federal overtime thing, but I believe the vast majority of states have stricter overtime laws than the federal government, and so the strictest laws tend to be the ones that work the best. If you're in somewhere like California, but California, their overtime laws are really weird because it's basically after you work 8 hours in a single day, anytime after that is overtime, or at least that's what it used to be at one point. And then in addition to over 40 hours a week, you also get overtime. So if you can get people to just work 40 hours, you save shit tons of money. You also prevent your staff from being overworked and a lot of other things. And then there's other things you can do, like, the cost of, turning the lights on. A lot of people don't realize just how expensive it is to run a building. Especially something like the Wizard of the Coast building, where the vast majority of people in the building are working on computers the entire time. And computers use a decent amount of electricity, especially if you have multiple monitor setups, which I'd assume quite a few of them do because they're very useful for productivity. Hasbro in and of itself is doing perfectly fine. Yeah, their revenue is down, but their profit margins are doing exceptionally well. And then he starts talking they start talking about specifically Wizards of the Coast. And everyone's going, whoa, Wizards of the Coast is doing really, really well, and people aren't buying their books. And they start looking into those things, and there's actually nothing to suggest, or there's one thing that they're trying to interpret means that people are buying less D&D books, and that number is massively misleading. Effectively, there was an article that came out that said that D&D books sales were down. Again, I don't remember the number. Treant Monk states it in their video. And Treant Monk starts kind of looking through to try and figure out, okay, well, where exactly is this number coming from? And it's coming from a single source. First things first, I've talked about this quite a few times before. For the most part, we don't know what tabletop RPGs are popular. And we don't know sales numbers for tabletop RPGs in general because unless you are a publicly traded company, which means that you're on the stock market somehow, you are not required to release sales figures. And due to the fact that the vast majority of companies that are producing tabletop RPGs are not publicly traded companies, which, by the way, just to clarify this, a publicly traded company is not a public company. A public company is state-owned. They are still considered private companies. They're just publicly traded. So if anyone tries to tell you that Hasbro is a public company, it's not. It's a privately owned company. It's just a publicly traded private company. To clarify that, because of that, we actually don't know how many copies of any books are sold into general because no one is required to release that information. And for the most part, companies don't want to release that information because it's extremely valuable to their competition. So how do we figure out, like, how did we know that Pathfinder beat D&D at one point? It didn't, by the way. Well, that comes from this company that I can't remember what they are, but effectively what they do is they make phone calls to various local game stores. And that is the only place they call. They only call brick and mortar stores. And this is how it's been since the 90s. This is how we've known effectively market shares of the tabletop RPG market. Is this one company goes around and it calls various brick and mortar stores. Whoever picks up the phone, it could be a manager, it could be a dude who it was their first day. They ask them a bunch of questions about what's selling the most. And that's how we figure it out. It is an unbelievably inaccurate measurement, and it doesn't take into account so many different variables. I've mentioned this before. From a scientific standpoint, one of the most important things that you have to do is what's called controlling for confounding variables. Basically, if you're trying to measure something, you need to make sure that what you're measuring is only affected by what you're trying to measure. Anything else that might affect that are called confounding variables. And that's generally the most difficult part of scientific experiment design, is finding ways to control for confounding variables. In this phone survey, there are so many confounding variables that they simply are not even attempting to control for, that the numbers themselves are almost worthless. The person that's talking to you might have a bias against a particular brand, or they might have a bias for a particular brand, and so they will intentionally lie saying this brand is more popular than they are. That's one thing. They might have an unconscious bias where they only really remember selling a certain kind of game. The numbers themselves might be wrong. Their inventory numbers might be off. There might be an internal theft or an external theft issue that's making them think that they've sold more than they actually have or sold less than they actually have. If the brick and mortar store has any kind of online presence, that might change things because the people in the store don't actually process the vast majority of the online orders. There's other people that do that. So that's just those. And then we have to think about, well, it also doesn't factor in how many books are being sold at Walmart, because they won't call Walmart. They're not a local game store. How many books are being sold at Barnes and Noble or any other big... technically, Walmart's a big box store. Barnes & Noble's a small box store. How many other large kind of franchises out there are selling these books that these people aren't even counting? And then it doesn't deal with online orders at all. It doesn't count anything for customers that order directly from the manufacturers. It doesn't count any orders from Amazon. And if you had to guess what the kind of percentage of people buying games in stores versus the percentage of people buying games online is after lockdowns and everything, would you assume that more people are buying in stores or more people are buying online? Yeah, me too. So that number in and of itself, again, has existed since the 90s. And because it is the only number that exists, people have used it for a long time. But it's a completely nonsense number. So that's one of the places they got this. The other thing that's actually Treant Monk actually talks about in his, their video is they're trying to figure out where did this number come that the numbers are down. According to the article that he read, which is the only article that is considered a primary source, for anyone that doesn't know, in journalism, primary source means that you're getting basically direct from the horse's mouth. You're getting knowledge from someone that has direct knowledge of it. Secondary sources are this person heard from this other person, but they don't have actual knowledge of it. They're just aware of someone else that actually has knowledge of it. That's called a secondary source. And I think theoretically you can get into tertiary sources and stuff like that. So all the articles that were saying that D&D book sales are down were quoting this one article. So technically, they were treating that one article as their primary source, and they were all secondary sources. But the article itself, the primary source that they use is unnamed, which I've already discussed at this point. I am done with unnamed mystery sources because during the OGL debacle, everything was from people familiar with the matter who outright lied over and over and over and over again, and people kept believing them for no reason other than they just wanted Wizards of the Coast to burn. So that in and of itself is not great. Then the way they describe this is a person with knowledge of the market. So this isn't a person from one of the companies or a person that works in distribution or something. This is just someone that knows the market. They talked to just a random dude and went, hey, do you think D&D book sales are down? And they said, yeah, I do. And that's where it came from. So that in and of itself, their quote-unquote primary source is a secondary source. So that number in and of itself is complete malarkey. There's nothing to support it. It's like, well, we asked this one random dude, and he said that D&D is not doing very well, and that means that they're down 477%. Yeah, that's real bad for them. They're buying books from themselves and then burning them so that they can keep heat on because they don't have no heat in their buildings because they're done so bad. It's complete nonsense and malarkey. There's nothing to support that. Tramp Monk actually goes into the few actual concrete sources because, again, as we mentioned before, Hasbro is a publicly traded company. So because of that, they are actually required to release quarterly revenue reports. Now, unfortunately, because Wizards of the Coast is a subsidiary of Hasbro, Wizards of the Coast doesn't actually have to break down their sales or anything like that. You basically just get a line item of Wizards of the Coast did this much. So figuring out exactly how much money D&D is making is not possible. And anything beyond just looking at Wizard of the Coast revenue and Wizard of the Coast profit, which Wizard of the Coast profit in and of itself is a conjectured number. Anything beyond that is just, it's impossible for us to guess. Again, there's so many confounding variables in there that there's no way to figure it out. One of the things where I think Tramp Monk gets things wrong is they're talking about, because they are able to find a number for digital sales. So they're trying to use that to figure out how much money D&D video games made Wizards of the Coast last year, or last quarter, I think it was. And so they're looking through that, and they're talking about, well, there's a lot of different things that could affect that. However, they were talking about the whole Larian Studios thing. He's like, well, technically, Larian Studios made Baldur's Gate 3, not Wizards of the Coast and not Hasbro. So it's effectively free money. All they did was license the brand out, and Larian had to do all the costs. So literally, that's 100% profit. It doesn't quite work that way. First things first, the process of licensing out the thing costs money. It costs money in the form of lawyers, in particular. And lawyers are very, very expensive. And it's not just the fact that, you know, you pay them once for when the contracts are signed. No, you keep them on retainer. And basically every time they have to relook that over for whatever reason, that costs money. Now, some of that money is shared among other things because 9 times out of 10, you're not going to have a lawyer whose only job is to work with Larian Studios. You know, they will work on other things as well. So, but that is a confounding variable. That's something that's going to affect the profitability. And 100%, it's not possible for that to be pure profit. Now, the other thing that's going to affect it, the other major thing, there's a bunch of other minor things that, again, I'm not going to get into because they become pedantic. But the other major thing is marketing. Well, Larian has their own marketing department, right? To be perfectly honest, I have no idea if Larian has their own marketing department or if they outsource their marketing to a marketing firm or whatever, but Larian does pay for marketing somewhat. Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro also fronted some of the marketing cost because they marketed Baldur's Gate. They didn't market it exclusively, but they did spend some money marketing Baldur's Gate. And something that people just don't seem to understand is marketing is ungodly expensive. I may mention this before. A single sponsored video for a YouTuber can earn them anywhere up to somewhere between like $20,000 up to over $100,000 for a single video. And when people hear that number, it's like, that's nonsense. It's crazy. How's that? That's not an expensive marketing campaign. Marketing campaign costs tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. When you look at, like one of my favorite examples, when you look at sales figures for movies, like you go to the Wikipedia page, it will say, this movie made this much money on a budget of this much. And a lot of times people will see that the movie, like let's say a movie costs $100 million to make, and it made $120 million into the ticket sales. Like, oh, well, the movie made a profit. No, that movie made a major loss. Well, what are you talking about? It made more money than it cost. Well, the number that is budgeted for the movie does not include marketing. In general, whatever the budget for the movie is, double it. And that's how much they spent on marketing. So for $100,000 or $100 million movie, they probably spent at a minimum another $100 million marketing it. Marketing is insanely expensive. So the idea that the money that Hasbro made from Larian Studios being pure profit, it has no basis in reality. And again, I'm not saying that Tramp Monk was intentionally misleading or anything like that. I firmly believe that they just simply don't have that particular knowledge base. Again, my degree, I have a bachelor's degree in business marketing management. My capstone was I had to build a business. So I had to design everything for this business. That was my capstone project that got me my degree. So I understand everything about how to run a business. Does that mean I'm good at it? Absolutely not. I had to redo my my accounting section, but because I hate accounting so much. And I put something as a, I made a big accounting mistake. I put something that was a liability and I put it in an asset. I put it in as an asset. And effectively, that means that I put something that should have been taking money away from my company, and I made it look like it was making my company money. That's the big no-no. That gets you put in jail. So am I a brilliant business? Your mileage may vary. I'm better at business than a lot of people I know that are currently running businesses. Does that mean that I should be running a Fortune 500 company or something like that? Hell no. But I have a really good head for business, and my particular degree is in marketing management. So I'm going to guarantee if Tramp Monk and I were to sit down and have a conversation, I could talk circles around them when it comes to marketing. And there's probably a lot of stuff that Tramp Monk knows about business that I don't, because they have different experiences than I do. My primary business experience was running retail stores. So I'm going to have that knowledge. Like I understand unemployment because retail is a high turnover company. So we were always dealing with unemployment insurance. I understand management and payroll and stuff like that because I was in charge of payroll at a couple of the different stores that I ran. I did all the scheduling. I did all the paychecks and everything. Like that was my job. So yeah, again, this is not me discounting what Tramp Monk was saying in the video. For the most part, the video is really, really solid where they just talk about the fact that the vast majority of the information that we're getting about D&D, and this is not just D&D YouTube, this is kind of games journalism, like tabletop games journalism in general, has been just blatantly lying to people about Wizard of the Coast. And Treant Monk kind of goes, I get kind of why they're doing it, because they're trying to get kind of rage clicks out of it. And I don't think that's probably part of it, but I think a bigger reason, and we see this in kind of legacy media in general, is they're trying to justify their existence. And let me explain why I think that. Legacy media has been doing incredibly poorly for over a decade at this point. And one of the biggest reasons why is for over 100 years, legacy media has been the controllers of what is and isn't known to the populace. If you watch, like, one of my favorite movies ever is a musical by Disney. It came out in the 90s. It's called Newsies. Eventually it was turned into a Broadway musical, which is phenomenal, but I still prefer the original movie musical. Fun fact, what's his name? Patrick Bateman. God, my brain is just going... American Psycho. What's his name? Christian Bale. There we go. My word. I can't believe I forgot his name. Christian Bale, as in Batman. He not only is in Newsies when he's very, very young, but he both sings and dances. And not only does he sing and dance, he sings and dances really, really well. Another thing a lot of people don't realize, because he plays so many American characters, Christian Bale is Welsh. And I want to... Is he not? Oh, well, let me look. I know he's English. So he was in... Yeah, so he's Welsh. His natural accent, he has an English accent. I don't know if he speaks with a really pronounced Welsh accent or not. But when you hear him speaking in his normal accent, he's obviously British. But in Newsies, because it's set in New York, he sounds like he's from New York, and it's eerie. Christian Bale has probably one of the greatest ears for accents currently working in the business right now. Like, he's absolutely brilliant. But anyway, so in Newsies, one of the things that happens is the basic plot of it is William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer are not making as much money as they were previously, right around the turn of the 20th century. And so they're trying to find a way to cut costs and make money. And so what they do is they increase the cost that it takes for the newsies or the newsboys to buy their papers. The way that these kids would make money is they would go up to a printer or a news place, and they would buy them generally at a reduced cost to what they would sell it at. They'd generally buy them for like a penny a paper, and then they'd sell them for like a nickel. So that's 80% profit margin. That's pretty good. And so what they decided to do is they increased the cost for 10 papers from 10 cents to 11 cents. So basically an insignificant amount of money, but they weren't going to increase the actual cost of the paper. So the newsies are going to be the ones that were going to have to deal with this increased cost. It was going to cut into their profit margins, and they already were not making a ton of money off it. Most of them lived in poverty. So they band together. They basically form their own union. They fight against it. And eventually they have this big rally because in their mind, if they make a big enough noise, people won't be able to ignore them. The papers will feel stupid about not covering it because that's what people are going to want to read. And any paper that doesn't cover the Newsies rally, because it was such a massive, big of an event, won't be able to sell any papers because people will be buying the papers specifically to read about that news story. Well, Hearst and Pulitzer meet with the owners of the other major papers in New York, and they agree to a media blackout. And the phrase is effectively, if it's not in the papers, it didn't happen. So, again, for hundreds of years, or over 100 years, legacy media has controlled what the public knows. Well, go back about 10, 15 years ago with the rise of social media and kind of activist journalists and independent journalists and things like that. People no longer have to tune into the 9 o'clock news or pick up a newspaper or listen to, public radio or something like that to find out what's going on. They can get it a lot of times directly from the horse's mouth. People are live streaming events that are happening around them. These new independent journalists are making names for themselves, and legacy media is losing their control over everything over and over and over again. And we've been seeing it a lot in legacy media now, where the idea of fake news and fact checkers and all that, which we found out that fact checkers are lying through their teeth 9 times out of 10 anyways. Going back to kind of Tabletop Gaming News, Tabletop Gaming News decided that Wizards of the Coast was done, and so they did the whole OGL debacle, which I've proven time and time again on here was based entirely on lies. There was literally so little actual truth in that entire movement, and there are still a ton of people that believe a lot of the lies because that's what the legacy media told them. Well, part of that was legacy media, because they decided that we're going to attack Wizards of the Coast. In order for them to look relevant, they need to kind of prove that what they did something. That's why they did the whole the thing talking about D&D Beyond subscriptions and going, 40,000 people canceled their D&D Beyond subscriptions, and that's why they took out monetization in the OGL. It had nothing to do with that. They had already taken it out before the news story had gone viral. They had already decided to take it out. You want to know why? Because in less than a week from the news story going viral, they had a brand new legal document. And in subsequent interviews, the people at Wizards, they had one person, I can't remember his name, actually came on and they said, well, then why did you guys change course when people were canceling their D&D Beyond subscriptions? And he said, we didn't. Well, yes, you did. People canceled their subscriptions and then just said, do you not understand how long it takes for a legal document to get approved changes to it? It takes weeks, sometimes months. We've been working on this for a long time. We did a great job getting it out as fast as we did, but we were working on this long before any of this became an issue. It's like, well, we don't believe you. It's like, obviously you don't understand how many different people had to okay that document. And every time a different person okayed it, they would put a different note on it. And then anytime a new note was put onto it, had to go back through the entire process all over again. That's how legal documents work. They're nonsense complicated. So my opinion, my theory, this is all theory, as to why all of these legacy media sites and a lot of D&D YouTube keep talking about how Wizards of the Coast is doing really, really bad and D&D is doing worse numbers than it's ever seen, when in fact the exact opposite is true. The reason why is they put all of their eggs in this one basket of, we are going to destroy Wizards of the Coast. And then they tried to claim victory, and it didn't work. Like, the OGL debacle did literally nothing to hurt D&D. Probably the only casualty of the OGL debacle was the D&D movie, which had so little to do with everything else that was going on. Like, the D&D movie had almost nothing to do with Wizards of the Coast, aside from the fact that they were using some IPs from Dungeons and Dragons. Other than that, it was a Hollywood movie. it was so far removed, and that is the only casualty, is that we're almost guaranteed to never get a sequel to that movie. At one point, they were talking about doing a TV series to continue the story, but that's probably as close as it's going to get. We will not get a continuation of that storyline with Chris Pratt and all those other really, really amazing actors. So yeah, the only thing that the legacy media can claim that they did was screw over a bunch of actors. That's it. And then producers and grips and basically everyone that worked on this movie. They screwed over Hollywood a little bit. It wasn't like it was a massive, massive thing. They didn't close down a studio. They stopped a sequel movie from being made. Congratulations. A sequel movie that probably would have created hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs for people around the world. So yeah, the only thing that Legacy Media was able to pull off was they got a bunch of people out of work. Congratulations. None of those people work for Wizards of the Coast, by the way. But yeah, congrats. You got a bunch of people that make next to no money. You ensured that they're not going to work. I hope you feel proud of yourself. So that's my personal theory as to why all of these groups are still so gung-ho on, well, Wizards is horrible and disgusting and we're going to kill them. Specifically, Tabletop Media, is because they're trying to kind of prove their relevance. They're trying to show that their existence is still necessary. And to be blunt, it's not. Especially since, again, they've gotten so far away from journalistic integrity and from actually reporting news, and have turned into activist organizations and misinformation proprietors, that they're less than worthless. That's why all these different news organizations are going belly up, because they've never had any value. When they were first created, they were created using what's called venture capital, which is basically these people give you a bunch of money in the hopes that eventually they'll be able to get some of that back. But they never actually made a profit. The entire existence of like BuzzFeed News, it never actually made a profit. It was never profitable. So all the venture capitalists kept putting more money in with the idea that eventually they will be able to make some money back. And eventually they realized they weren't going to get any money, and so they stopped putting their venture capital in. And that's why all these companies are closing down. They were never valuable. They were barely useful for a little bit in their early incarnations when they were actually reporting news. But as soon as they realized that they could make more money by lying to people, and the more important thing is that they had, they could consolidate power by ensuring that they would create dangerous stories and talk about people that they didn't like, and they would label them as a bunch of different things. I'm not going to say any of the names because it'll get me dinged by YouTube. But they would declare a group an other group, kind of, the Scientology thing of what they have a thing that they label someone as like a destructive personality, I think is what they call it. Basically, they declare someone a destructive personality, and then they convince everyone that this person needs to be shunned from society. And it gave them an unbelievably large amount of power. And that's what they really were looking for. Again, they never actually made any money. They were always losing money. But what they did make was power. They had lots of power. It was one of the things that was really, really enticing to venture capitalists is, well, they weren't going to make their money back, but what they were going to get is some power by being able to influence who they sicked their dogs on. And now they just don't have that power, and so they're desperately, fervently trying to prove that, no, we're still important. We still get to choose who exists in this space, and they don't. So, yeah. Anyway, I thought it was a really good video. Like I said, I've got a link to it in the description. Watch the video. The video itself's just barely over 20 minutes. So my video talking about his video, where I only talk probably about like 20%, talk about like 20% of the video. There's more there than what I talk about. is over double what theirs was. So that's how my brain works, folks. Anyway, it's going to be all for me today. I will see you guys in the next time. All right? Bye-bye.